Daf Yomi, Tractate Menachot, page 12b. Almost at the top of the page with the words Amar le'abaye. Amar le'abaye lo hamani ravelazori litnan hakometz ve'levona ve'ketores uminchas kohanim uminchas kohen Mashiach uminchas nisochim shikri ve'achas mien gezayis b'chutz chayav. Abaye said to Rava, no, one cannot prove from here that the Mishnah is discussing the case of a remainder that became lacking. The reason for this is, in accordance with whose opinion is this Mishnah of Rabbi Chia? It is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, as we learned in the Mishnah, Zvachim 109b, with regard to the handful of flour and the frankincense and the incense and the meal offering of priests. See Leviticus 109b. Leviticus 6:16. Leviticus 6:16. And the meal offering of the anointed priests, Leviticus 6:12-15. And the meal offering that accompanies the libations brought with animal offerings, see Numbers 15:1-16. Where one sacrificed an olive bullock from one of them outside the temple courtyard, he is liable for sacrificing outside the courtyard. Rabbi Elazar exempts one from liability until he sacrifices them in their entirety, rather than just an olive bullock from them. Kevan debehaktaras kemitza lomanile okizayis mikum tzabachutz. Abaye concludes, since with regard to the burning of the handful he could not teach or burn an olive bulk of its handful outside the temple, as according to Rabbi Elazar, one is not liable for burning anything less than the full handful, and therefore intent to burn only an olive bulk does not render the offering pigul. With regard to the remainder as well, he did not teach or an olive bulk. Rabbi Elazar, hai lehaktir kumsa ulevonasa, mi boele litnan hakometz ve'lavona, shikriv et echad mehem b'chutz chayav, Rabbi Elazar potir, ad sheyakriv et shnehem. The Gemara asks, if the Mishnah of Rabbi Chia is really in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar, then this statement, to burn its handful outside the temple courtyard, should have been phrased, to burn its handful and its frankincense outside the temple courtyard. As we learned in a Mishnah, Zevachim 110a. With regard to the handful and the frankincense, in a case where one sacrificed only one of them outside the temple courtyard, he is liable, and Rabbi Eliezer exempts from liability one who burns only one of them until he sacrifices both of them together. The Gemara responds, the Mishnah of Rabbi Chia is necessary only for the handful of the meal offering of a sinner which has no frankincense, since only the burning of the handful permits the remainder of the sinner's meal offering for consumption. One's intent to burn it the next day renders the offering pigul. With regard to this meal offering, one is not liable for burning anything less than the full handful according to Rabbi Elazar, and therefore it does not teach or an olive bulk. Ve'ikpel tana lashkoin comments the minchas koitein. V'chein ki ata Rabbi Dimi amar Rabbi Elazar comments the minchas kotehu v'Rabbi Elazar hi. The Gemara asks, and did the Tana go to all that trouble just to teach us a halacha that is applicable only in the case of the handful of the meal offering of a sinner? The Gemara responds, yes, he did. And similarly, when Rav Dimi came to Babylonia from Eretz Yisrael, he said that Rabbi Elazar ben Padat said, when the Mishnah discusses an instance where one has intent to sacrifice the handful of a meal offering outside, it is referring to the handful of the meal offering of a sinner, and it is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Elazar. Rava then said, that which I said, that the burning of the handful with the intent to consume the remainder the next day is effective in rendering even a remainder that became lacking in measure as pigling, to remove it from being subject to misuse of consecrated property is nothing, as it is taught in Bright. The verse states with regard to the showbread, it is most holy, Leviticus 24:9. The restrictive term "it" teaches that the showbread must remain whole, so that if one of the loaves of the showbread broke and consequently became lacking in measure, then all of its loaves are disqualified, and the burning of the bowls of frankincense do not render them permitted for consumption. Hayatzis Hanitika Gavai Kesheos Mai Shemat Leili Amal Zrika Moeles Niyotzer Bekivahi Vikama Nifusara. The Rava continues, it can be inferred from the Braita that if the loaves remained whole, but one of them left the temple, those that are inside the temple are still fit. And whom have you heard who says the sprinkling of the blood is effective in rendering pigul an item that left the temple? It is Rabbi Akiva, and yet he says in this Braita that if one of the loaves broke, the burning of the frankincense is not effective for them. Similarly, with regard to the remainder of a meal offering that became lacking in measure, even Rabbi Akiva agrees that the burning of the handful is ineffective in rendering it pigul. Abaye said to Rava, how can you cite proof from this Braita? It is taught in this Braita, but if a loaf of showbread left, whose loaves that remain inside are fit, perhaps all the loaves are disqualified, if even one of them left, and one should infer a different halacha from the Braita, that if one of the loaves became ritually impure, these that remain pure are fit. My time di maratza tzitz avayatzas lo. Rabbi Eliezer de Amar ein zrika moeles liyotze. Abaye explains what is the reason for such a distinction. The reason is that the front plate of the high priest affects acceptance for ritually impure offerings, but in a case where a loaf of the showbread left, the front plate does not affect acceptance, and therefore all of the loaves are disqualified, as in a case where one loaf breaks. And if so, the Braita is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, who says that sprinkling is not effective with regard to an item that left the temple courtyard. Uvadinhu di ba'ile lemistina miyatzas v'hai ketanu nifresa hakamash b'handa filo nifresa disi b'fnim l'mahadi le'akto aval Rabbi Akiva de'ama zrika mo'eres liosea fidu chesav nami mehanya Le Haktava. Abaye continues, and by right, the Braita should have also taught that one of the loaves of showbread left, all the loaves are disqualified. If one of the loaves of showbread left, all the loaves are disqualified. And as for the fact that it teaches the halacha specifically with regard to a loaf that broke, this is what the Braita teaches us, that even if the loaf broke, in which case the loaf is still inside the temple, burning is not effective with regard to it, but according to Rabbi Akiva, who says that sprinkling is effective with regard to an item that left the temple, even in the case of a lacking measure, burning is effective with regard to it. That sums it up for the Talmud, or that Mishnah, now new Mishnah. Zog the Mishnah lechol chatzizayis. Ulehak chatzizayis kosher she'enach nirachta b'salfim. The Mishnah says if one's intent was to partake of half an olive bulk of the remainder and to burn half of an olive bulk of it, not at the appropriate time or not in the appropriate area, the offering is fit because eating and burning do not join together. If one's intent was to partake of half an olive bulk, who thinks about half an olive? Okay, anyway, just in case you did. If one thought that he would partake of half an olive bulk of the remainder and burn half an olive bulk, then he doesn't. It's no problem because they don't join together. Zog the Talmud, the Gemara says on this Mishnah, time the Gemara infers from the Mishnah. Excuse me just one moment. I'll let it run a little bit. And you get some lozengers. They're called lozenges, but I can't say lozenges. I want to say lozengers. Just look at the name. Cough drop. Lozenger. Lozengers. My throat. Okay. Into the realms of lozengers. Okay, where were we? Okay. Let's start the Gemara again. The Gemara infers from the Mishnah the reason that the two halves maybe it's starting for the first time. The Gemara infers from the Mishnah the reason that the two halves of an olive bulk do not join together is because his intent was to partake of half an olive bulk and to burn half an olive bulk, which indicates that if his intent was to partake of half an olive bulk of the remainder and to partake of half an olive bulk of an item whose typical manner is such that one does not consume it, meaning the handful, then the halves to join together to the amount of an olive bulk and disqualify the offering. The Gemara notes an apparent contradiction. But the first clause teaches, in the earlier Mishnah, if one's intent was to partake of an item whose typical manner is such that one partakes of it, or to burn an item whose typical manner is such that one burns it on the altar, beyond this designated time, the offering is pigal. One can infer from this Mishnah that if his intent was to partake of an item whose typical manner is such that one partakes of it, yes, such intent disqualifies an offering. But if his intent was to partake of an item whose typical manner is such that one does not partake of it, this intent does not disqualify the offering. And likewise, such intent does not join together with another to this end. If so, who is the Tana who taught the latter clause? Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah Hamani. Rabbi Eliezer Hidi Amar B'chashvin Mechilas Adam Mizbeach Mechilas Mizbeach Ne'adam. Rabbi Yirmiyah said, in accordance with whose opinion is this Mishnah? It is in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, who says that one can have improper intent from the consumption performed by a person to the consumption performed by the altar, and from the consumption performed by the altar to the consumption performed by a person. In other words, if one's intent was to burn the remainder the next day or to consume the handful the next day, such intent disqualifies an offering, even though the remainder is intended for consumption by the priests and the handful is intended for burning upon the altar. Ditnan Hakom et Samincha. Echol davar she'indak, echol laktir davar she'indak, laktir. Koshel. But Rabbi Eliezer Pasel, the Gemara cites the relevant ruling of Rabbi Eliezer, as we learned in the Mishnah 17a, in the case of one who removes a handful from the meal offering with the intent to consume after its designated time, an item whose typical manner is such that one does not consume it, meaning a handful, or to burn beyond its designated time, an item whose typical manner is such that one does not burn it on the altar, meaning the remainder of the meal offering. The meal offering is fit, and Rabbi Eliezer deems it unfit, although it is not pigul, and consuming it was not punishable by karet. Abaye Omal. Afilu tema abona no tema ha'elechol ולאכול לבוא, שאין דלקו לאכול, אלא אימה, הולאכול ולאכול דבר שדלקו לאכול. Abaye said, you may even say that the Mishnah here is in accordance with the opinion of the rabbis. And do not say that one should infer from the Mishnah that if his intent was to partake of half an olive bulk of an item whose typical manner is such that one consumes it, and to partake of half an olive bulk of an item whose typical manner is such that one does not partake of it, the offering is disqualified. Rather, say that if his intent was to partake of half an olive bulk on the next day, and to partake of half an olive bulk outside the temple, and each of these halves is from an item whose typical manner is such that one partakes of it, then the halves are joined together and disqualify the offering. Umay kamash melon, habehed yikatani lechol kezayis bechutz, uchezayis lemachol. Kezayis lemachol, kezayis bechutz. Kechatzi zayis bechutz, kechatzi zayis lemachol, kechatzi zayis lemachol. Chatzi zayis menachutz, pasul ve'im by koches. The Gemara asks, and what is this teaching us? The previous Mishnah already teaches that principle explicitly. If one performed one of these rites with the intent to partake of an olive bulk outside its designated area, and an olive bulk the next day, or an olive bulk the next day, and an olive bulk outside its designated area, or half an olive bulk outside its designated area, and half an olive bulk the next day, or half an olive bulk the next day, and half an olive bulk outside its designated area, the offering is unfit, but there is no liability for karet.